Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel. It's that time of year again, time to take a look at the good, bad, and somewhere in between of the year that was in rock and metal. Today, getting that series started, counting down my top 20 favorite metal albums of 2025. Let's kick things off here at number 20. I'm going to go with Duel by Ginger. You know, I love the emotional intensity and unrelenting energy on display on this record, particularly in Tatiana Shmelyuk's vocals, and it seamlessly combines, ferocious heaviness with some really haunting melodic moments too, and I think it's a great showcase for their dynamic range, moving, effortlessly between crushing riffs and some really evocative passages too, and some standout tracks for me include the title track, Green Serpent, Someone's Daughter, and Hedonist, and I think lyrically and thematically, Duel feels super personal, resulting in a record that feels, not just heavy, but also really urgent and alive, and I think it's a fantastic follow-up to Wallflowers from 2021. Number 19, Birth of Malice by Destruction. German thrash metal legends, and I think in general this was, all things considered, a pretty underrated year for thrash metal, but Birth of Malice, 16th studio album by Destruction, is a really strong testament to the band's enduring dedication to that old school thrash metal sound, right, delivering with razor sharp twin guitar work, right, got some fantastic riffs on here, aggressive vocals, and you got that classic thrash ferocity on here with standout tracks like Cyber Warfare, God of Gore, Evil Never Sleeps, also a killer cover of Fast as a Shark by Accept here as well, and I don't know if I would consider it to be top shelf Destruction, but still a really strong entry into their catalog, one that stayed true to the roots of their, discography while also injecting some really fresh energy too. Number 18, Metal Fourth by Baby Metal. This album I think represents a major turning point for Baby Metal. I mean, it's their first album to feature Moko Akazaki as an official member and their debut release on their new label Capitol Records, and whether you love the term kawaii metal or not, this album marks a really important step in the group's evolution, leaning further into what they describe as beyond heavy metal, fusing their signature genre mixing approach with a more global contemporary sound here. And for longtime followers of the band, this record still showcases them honoring their roots here and their foundation, but also expanding upon that and pushing the boundaries of their music and their identity into fresh territory. And as a fan, it's been really cool to follow the development of their sound as they become more confident musicians and have really started to shed the whole gimmick band allegations. Number 17, let's go with Divided We Fall by Biohazard. Their long-awaited return album, their first studio album in over a decade, reigniting the raw and gritty energy that defined their 90s prime here. And this record delivers the band's trademark fusion of hardcore, metal, and some really infectious grooves as well, updated with some really polished production. The album sounds fantastic, and tracks on here like Forsaken and Eyes on Six hit hard and capture the band's, uncompromising vibe. And, many of these songs would fit seamlessly alongside, the band's classic material. I think they echo the raw power and attitude of albums like Urban Discipline or State of the World Address. And, as a statement of their return, I think it's a great, kind of way to show that they still have a lot left in the tank and a lot more to offer. So one of the, reunion albums in 2025 that I was most looking forward to, just a killer comeback. Number 16, going to go with Borderland by Amorphous. This is their 15th studio album, and the band returned to the studio here with some real revitalized momentum. First time they've worked with producer Jacob Hansen, and the album strikes a really careful balance between the band's melodic and folk influenced roots and a sleek modern production style as well. And what I really love about this record is that tracks like Light and Shadow and The Lantern weave together some really sorrowful melodies, folk colored atmospheres, and progressive metal intricacy that shift fluidly between some really evocative passages and of course the heavier, weightier, more powerful moments. And rather than reinvent themselves entirely, Amorphous does a great job here of playing to their strengths on Borderland, and the outcome is a mature and emotionally resonant record that feels like genuine progression of their sound and not a repetition. Number 15, The Blue Nowhere by Between the Buried and Me, who resurfaced after a 4-year hiatus, and for the first time since 2005, they did so as a 4-piece following the departure of longtime guitarist Dusty Waring, and this album feels recognizable and new at the same time. It really taps into the band's, progressive metal and technical roots while also venturing into rich atmospheres, layered textures, and even elements of funk and synth-driven experimentation. And, one thing I love about Between the Buried and Me is that they, are no strangers to into, experimenting with different things, trying different sounds. And so I really love that on tracks like Things We Tell Ourselves in the Dark to kick things off, and the title track as well. And lyrically, it's very strong and, super introspective. And for a group that's, synonymous with constant, reinvention and intricate musicianship, I think the Blue Nowhere emerges as one of their most varied and unpredictable, maybe even emotionally candid releases to date. Number 14 here, let's go with Hymns in Dissonance by Whitechapel, their 9th studio album, and it marks a deliberate shift back to the band's, most punishing and uncompromising sound, and gone are the cleaner vocals and melodic experiments of their recent work. Instead, this record dives headfirst into, pure deathcore, delivering crushing riffs, non-stop blast beats, and, really colossal breakdowns, ferocious guttural vocals here as well. And what makes the album stand out is, how its sheer aggression is paired with, a larger creative vision. You know me, I love a good concept album, and this is built around a really cool concept, and this is a major high point for the band, I think, their best record in a long time, and a fantastic revival of their early intensity mixed with, modern songwriting and production. Their sound is, super crisp, produced by Zach Householder. It's their first record since A New Era of Corruption not to be produced by Mark Lewis, and some standouts here for me include the title track, Diabolic Slumber, The Abysmal Gospel, and Nothing Is Coming for Any of Us to close things out. Number 13, Legends by Sabaton. Pretty much exactly what I expected from Sabaton, to be completely honest. They've become very comfortable with, similar sound and approach on every record. One of the most consistent power metal bands out there today, and it's not a bad thing to say this is what I anticipated from Sabaton. I mean, they're kind of like an AC/DC or a Motorhead in the sense that they know their sound, they know what works, and they don't deviate much from it. If they were ever going to change their sound, the next album is the time to do it, but if they don't, I'm cool with that too. Personally, I wouldn't mind hearing the band add some more symphonic elements to their sound, but you really can't go wrong with the sheer power of Sabaton, and that's all on display on this record. Big hooks throughout, and commanding vocals by Joachim Broden. Standouts for me include Templars, Hordes of Khan, A Tiger Among Dragons, Crossing the Rubicon, Impaler, probably the best song on this record. Love that track. Lightning at the Gates, The Duelist, Cycle of Songs. So some great stuff here, and these are textbook Sabaton through and through. And it's another really enjoyable album by them, though not quite as strong as their last few records. Still a worthy addition to their catalog. At number 12 here, I'm going to go with Blood Dynasty by Arch Enemy, and this is the first Arch Enemy record to feature guitarist Joey Concepcion following the departure of Jeff Loomis in 2023. Personally, I think they underutilized Jeff Loomis in Arch Enemy, but it's also the fourth full-length record with vocalist Alyssa White-Glutz, and unfortunately what looks to be the last album of that era as well. Alyssa recently announced her departure from the band, which came as quite a shock and a little bit of a bummer as well after, the quality of Blood Dynasty. Arch Enemy are no strangers to lineup changes, but they managed to come through with a sharp and polished album nonetheless, and I'm not comparing it to stuff from like 30 years ago, but there's no shortage of killer riffs and fiery solos throughout the album. The guitar work feels inspired, dynamic, and consistently engaging, and Alyssa's vocals remain as powerful and commanding as ever, shifting seamlessly between, snarling aggression and, soaring clarity, and, the drumming on here is impressively tight as well, driving each track forward with real precision and intensity. A track like March of the Miscreant stands out as a particularly strong cut, perfect blend of, melody and ferocity that captures the band at their best at this stage in their careers now, and overall the album feels like a step up from Deceivers, delivering a more cohesive and impactful listening experience. I feel like the songwriting is sharper and the performances are more engaged. The production gives every element in here a chance to breathe as well, so I really enjoyed this album. I saw some people giving it mixed reviews when it came out, but it was one of my most anticipated records of this year, and so I really dug it quite a bit. And yeah, it's a bummer that Alyssa White-Glutz no longer a part of Arch Enemy, but like I said, a band no stranger to lineup changes. Interested to see where they go next. Number 11, Hailstorm and their new record Everest. They followed up Back from the Dead, arguably their most abrasive and heavy record to date, with Everest, an album that feels even more introspective from a lyrical standpoint, and there's more ballads on this record, but an equal amount of raw emotion behind Lizzie Hale's powerhouse vocals. She sounds incredible on this album as usual, and you have some really killer guitar solos on here as well. Despite being reflective and ballad heavy, there's still a great mix of softer tracks with straightforward rockers. Lots of songs that feel like they were written to be played live. Some standouts for me include Everest, Shiver, Like a Woman Can, Rain Your Blood on Me, Darkness Always Wins, Broken Doll, Watch Out, I Gave You Everything, and How Will You Remember Me to close things out. Moving into the top 10 now with Volume 6 by Sacrifice, Canadian thrash metal legends, who returned yet again after another long gap in between albums with Volume 6. And from the very first track, this album erupts into a full-speed assault of pure thrash metal mastery. The guitars and bass slice through the mix, and you have some really controlled frenzy drumming, which I really enjoy here. And Sacrifice hits every hallmark that fans expect, both from their own legacy and their own catalog, and from the thrash genre as a whole. Right out of the gate here, and that intensity never fades from beginning to end. Each song builds on the album's ferocity, and it's exactly the kind of relentless, satisfying barrage you'd hope, from Sacrifice after yet another hiatus. And some standout tracks for me include Comatose, Antidote of Poison, We Will Not Survive, Your Hunger for War, and Incoming Mass Extinction that really propel this record into the top 10 for me. Sacrifice, super underrated band, never talked about with the same reverence as, the Bay Area thrash legends, but absolutely deserving of the same recognition. Number 9, Giants and Monsters by Helloween. Helloween's Pumpkins United lineup had the very tall task of following up their big reunion album, self-titled, from 2021, and while I don't think they quite topped it, I think they turned out with a great record here, and admittedly my expectations were a bit low going into this album, after the band had talked about taking a more laid-back approach to this record's songwriting, and then the lead single, This Is Tokyo, which in hindsight is, much better than the context of the album, but if there was ever a song that was, written to be, a Japanese bonus track, it's that one. But I was concerned it was going to be another Pink Bubbles Go Ape situation all over again, where the band follow up a classic record with a less serious release, but Old Habits did not die hard on this album. I was very relieved to hear the blend of power metal with some prog elements here too, some speed metal as well, that really takes you back to early Helloween, and this album does a great job of blending styles from multiple different eras of their career into one, and I suppose 2 albums in now, that's kind of what the Pumpkins United era is going to be all about. Michael Kiske still sounds phenomenal as always here, and I'm not the biggest fan of the Andy Darius era. I find his songs to be the weakest on the record, but they're still fun and catchy. Some favorites here for me include Giants on the Run, Savior of the World, We Can Be Gods, Into the Sun, Universe, Gravity for Hearts, one of the longer songs on the record, and Majestic to close things out. Some killer stuff here by Helloween, loving, the Pumpkins United lineup and the 2 records they've released so far together. Like I said before, kind of blending every era together, and it sounds, like the full evolution of Helloween's sound. Number 8, let's go back to thrash metal here with The Arsonist by Sodom. Thrash metal legends Sodom are back with the follow-up to Genesis 19, and they continue to build on the momentum of that record here with their best mixed album in a long time. The drums just sound like cannons, and the guitar work is downright ferocious, and it's great to see Sodom still turning out Album of the Year contenders at this stage in the game here, and this whole album is raw and aggressive in, the style of their classic era here. It blends a modern edge with the old school intensity of their classic stuff, and standouts for me include The Arsonist, The Battle of Harvest Moon, Trigger Discipline, Scavenger, Gun Without Groom. Twilight Void reminds me very much of Slayer, in my opinion, which is kind of interesting. Return to God in Parts to close things out. Great stuff here on Steamhammer Records, and like I said, just awesome to see Sodom still killing it in the studio. Number 7, Screaming of the Valkyries by Cradle of Filth. Now, I know modern-day Cradle of Filth is pretty polarizing, but I really enjoyed Existence is Futile from 2021, and I think Screaming of the Valkyries is even stronger, blending that sinister, savage, classic Cradle of Filth sound with fresh energy and sharper production. And Danny Field's vocals still sound incredible, and the addition of Zoe Marie Fedorov on keyboards and female vocals was a great acquisition as well. And even though this lineup didn't last all that long, because it turns out Danny Filth is the world's worst boss, still, I think this album packs a serious punch, and this lineup was, just on fire. Really enjoy the songs on here, and you can see the lineup on the back. Some great standout tracks on here for me that include To Live Deliciously, Demagoguery, Trinity of Shadows, White Hellbore, You Are My Nautilus. Malignant Perfection is great. When Misery Was a Stranger, I feel like, this album, the, production is great for extreme metal standards, especially, the guitars sound extra crunchy, and really everything gets a chance to breathe in the mix. This feels like a return to form in a lot of ways for Cradle of Filth, and like I said, too bad this lineup didn't seem to work out, but they always seem to reinvent themselves with Danny Filth at the helm, so looking forward to how they follow this up. Number 6, Inverted World by Cancer. Maybe an unpopular opinion, but I think the last 2 Cancer albums are are the best work of their entire careers. Inverted World, I think, improves even more on what they were able to accomplish with Shadow Gripped. Back here with a new lineup, and this record is super heavy with big hooks. It's full of great riffs and nasty solos, and really harsh vocals as well from John Walker, and some standouts for me on this album include Enter the Gates, Until They Died, Inverted World, 39 Bodies, Amputate, Covert Operations, Jesus for Eugenics, and Corrosive to close things out. These tracks are definitely worth your time if you're a fan of old school death metal from a band nearly 40 years into their career, still writing really well-crafted music with a touch of thrash metal in there as well. Breaking into the top 5 here with Skeletor by Ghost. And I know not everybody loves Ghost, right? I get it. I mean, their sound is very poppy. Some purists wouldn't even consider them to be metal, but I always have personally, and this album feels like a love letter to, 80s big hooks and choruses. Papa V was definitely an 80s kid, and I can hear influences of Journey in Europe throughout. And lyrically, this album feels more introspective, kind of like the curtain was pulled back a bit, and it feels more like a Tobias Forge solo record than a Ghost album at times. And like every Ghost album, though, it takes a few listens to fully appreciate it. I think it's grown on a ton of people since release day, with standout tracks on here like Peacefield, Lacrima, Satanized, Guiding Lights. Really every track on here I love. De Profundis Borealis, Cenotaph, Mycilia Amore is a lot of fun. Marks of the Evil One, very fun as well. Umbra, that is classic Ghost through and through. Excelsis to close things out, kind of like Life Eternal 2.0. And this was produced by Gene Walker, who's totally not Tobias Forge under a different name. Wink, wink. Totally not. I already got Gene Walker once when I was reviewing the album. It's not going to happen again. But this album has a big, almost arena rock sound to it. And I think the material they've done live from this record has sounded incredible on Skeletor. And I wish they would do more from this album live, as a matter of fact. I saw them this past summer. It was actually the day Ozzy passed. And Tobias Forge dedicated the show to Ozzy. And it was a fantastic show on a really sad day for metal. So I always have specific memories of seeing them on this tour. But every Ghost album feels different. It has its own identity. And this record is a throwback for sure. A lot of these songs wouldn't sound out of place, in heavy rotation on MTV back in the day, and so I think that's really cool. Number 4, Parabellum by Testament. And, I asked the question on the channel for years, how would Testament possibly be able to follow up Titans of Creation, which, in my opinion, is their best post-reunion album, and I really don't think they could have topped it by doing, more of the same. I feel like Titans of Creation was the apex of everything that they had been building to since formation of Damnation, and so the band threw a lot of people for a curveball here on the new album by incorporating blackened metal elements that were not present on the singles. So it left myself and a lot of people really surprised when the first track, For the Love of Pain, came on, and at a few parts on this album, I can definitely hear Dragon Lord influences from Eric Peterson, which I thought was really cool. And this album is a real melting pot of styles, right? You have, of course, that classic thrash sound, with blackened elements as well, some death metal, some traditional metal here, and more. I think it's the best balance of Chuck Billy's, growls and cleans since Low from 1994. He sounds incredible here. Standout tracks, like I said, For the Love of Pain is great, Infanticide AI, Meant to Be, very, solid Testament ballad. They do ballads better than, just about anybody, right? This is a very Return to Serenity-esque ballad here, so I enjoyed that quite a bit. Probably would move it a little bit on the album, maybe have to close out the record, because it does kind of disrupt the flow of, the thrashier, heavier stuff, but still, great ballad, kind of exists in its own world on this album. Witch Hunt, Room 117, Havana Syndrome, Parabellum to close things out. So some great stuff here, and this year started off slow for thrash metal, right? But the second half of 2025 proved to be really strong for new thrash material, and 2026 is looking even stronger with new stuff from Megadeth and Creator confirmed for Q1 already. Also new Exodus in the works with Rob Dukes as well. Top 3 here, let's go with An Insatiable Violence by Cryptopsy. I feel like too many people impede their enjoyment of Cryptopsy by comparing everything to None So Vile. That album is untouchable, but if you go into their new stuff with an open mind, I think you'll find they're doing some of the best work of their careers, right now on An Insatiable Violence. A definite improvement over As Gomorrah Burns, and Christian Donaldson is just absolutely on fire on guitar. The whole record is very tight and concise, clocking in at 33 minutes long, and this album does a great job of refreshing the Cryptopsy formula on tracks like, The Art of Emptiness, Our Great Deception, Until There's Nothing Left as well. The production is probably my only criticism here. It sounds a bit too sterile, but you can't deny this is some masterful technical death metal, and a surefire candidate for my favorite death metal record of 2025. Number 2, Parasomnia by Dream Theater. Mike Portnoy's return to Dream Theater was the creative spark that the band needed to tack back into that classic feel and give us their best album since Black Clouds and Silver Linings. And nothing at all against the Mike Mangini era. I think he was great, and there's some great stuff there too, but having Portnoy back behind the kit gives the album so much energy and the band's sound revitalized as a whole, and it's progressive and heavy with callbacks to old school Dream Theater as well. Kicks off with an awesome instrumental intro for Into the Arms of Morpheus, which sets the tone for the rest of the record. Other standouts here include Night Terror, Dead Asleep, probably my favorite song on the record, Bend the Clock, great ballad, Midnight Messiah. You know, I say the singles that were released sound much better than the context of the album. And then, of course, to close things out, the Shadow Man Incident, kind of putting a new spin on Dream Theater's big, nearly 20-minute album closers. So I enjoyed that quite a bit. There's fresh ideas on here, and, James LaBrie sounds the best he has in years on this album. Jordan Rudess is phenomenal, as always, and John Petrucci's ability to still write fresh and exciting solos is astounding. I would say astonishing, but let's leave that album in the past. Nonetheless, tons of excitement surrounding Portnoy's return to the band, and this album definitely lived up to the hype. And finally, coming in at number 1, I'll give you guys a hint. It's not the new Dark Angel album. My favorite record in metal for 2025 has got to be Dissonance Theory by Coroner. After over 30 years, Coroner returned to the studio with Dissonance Theory, one of the most anticipated records of, the second half of 2025, and they did not skip a beat at all. They made up for lost time in a big way. It's the band's first album since Grin from 1993, and their first with drummer Diego Rapacetti behind the kit. And you also have, of course, Ron Broder on vocals and bass, Tommy Vetterli on guitars, and waiting for this record was crazy, but I'm glad the band took their time with this, and it's just a blisteringly heavy album. Super tight playing, very consistent throughout with meticulous and lengthy tracks. The production is incredible, and this might be one of the best produced thrash albums I've heard in a very long time. And the best thing about this record is that it feels fresh. At no point at all do I feel like the band were rehashing ideas from 30 years ago. They put a modern twist on their signature sound and intensity, but it keeps you guessing from start to finish here. Standouts include A Consequence, Sacrificial Lamb, Chrysium Bound, Symmetry, Transparent Eye, Renewal, and Prolonging to close out the record here. Little spoiler for my best thrash metal of 2025 list later this month. This is the thrash album of the year, by far, in my opinion, and one of the best metal comeback albums of all time. So that wraps up this list here, counting down my top 20 favorite metal albums of 2025. This is one of the biggest videos of the year. Look forward to this one all year. You can see my picks right over here. And we're going to be doing videos like this all throughout December. Best rock albums, best thrash albums, best death metal albums, the worst albums of the year as well. So we'll be talking all things the year in review as the month goes on here. But wanted to kick off this series here with the best in metal for 2025. And there were a lot of great albums this year. Lots of great stuff. I think it picked up in the second half more so than in the first half. But overall, really pleased with the albums we got in 2025 and wanted to share my top 20 favorites. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel down below. Turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload. Follow me on Instagram at the CD Guy JZ. And let me know down in the comments section below what are your thoughts on my picks and what are some of your favorite metal albums of 2025. I want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CD Guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.